Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today I continue working on single-player versions of multiplayer games because #forever alone. Today's project is inspired by the recent hit social deduction game, Among Us. Now, making a single-player game based around social deduction is kind of hard, so we'll be attempting more of a translation rather than some type of conversion, if that makes any sense. Anyway, the plan will be to translate the core elements of Among Us and turn them into a single-player experience with a farm theme, so I can justify the stupid name pun for this project. We'll do this by breaking down the gameplay into a stealth-based assassination game mode and maybe some type of mystery-solving whodunit type of game mode, which we'll start on today by first focusing on the stealth assassination part. Sounds like a confusing mess, I agree, but let's see what happens as we get to the coding. First was setting up variables for players' reach and cooldown for their special action. But before we could continue, we needed an indicator icon like in Among Us, so one was crudely drawn in the sprite editor. And while I doodle this up, allow me to briefly go over my idea for this mode. Now, much like Among Us, the goal is to pick off targets one by one without getting caught. However, to replace the social aspect, instead NPCs will have suspicion levels. And depending on how the player acts, those suspicion levels will raise or lower over time. I've actually been wanting to do something like this ever since I played that one Dark Brotherhood quest in Oblivion. You know the one. But in our case, actions will speak louder than words. So anyway, with our icon now doodled and ready to be drawn to the screen, it was time to get to the coding. First, I set up checks to determine eligible NPCs to target. If an eligible target is within range, they are marked, and our dastardly action is enabled. Then any button check for the action key. If we're able to do the deed, the target is eliminated and a cooldown goes into effect. And finally, our new icon would be drawn to the screen, with the opacity changing depending on the status of our desired action. The results were half what we expected. The elimination code worked just fine, but there was obviously some issues regarding the display state of the icon. So a bunch of tweaking was done before I realized, given the simplicity of the game, why not simply destroy the NPCs on elimination? Doing this would cut down on the need for so many checks and would generally simplify the entire process. So after doing just that, all we needed was to check for an NPC, their distance, and whether the player is on cooldown. If the player passes the checks, then the target is eliminated and a corpse object would be dropped in its place. This gave us exactly what we needed, with the new simplified approach providing a much more forward and expected result. So now that we could eliminate targets, it was time to mess around with the idea of suspicion levels. First, we were going to need a big ol' emergency button. We'll be using this as the destination for any and all NPCs who manage to max out their suspicion levels. Once they reach said button, that's game over for the player. With the button done and ready to be spawned into the world, it was time to work on the CPU farmers. Sus level and view distance variables were added, and in a new step event, we'd have them keep an eye out for corpses. And just for now, if a corpse is within view distance of an NPC, and the player also happens to be in the view distance, then the CPU sus level instantly goes to 10. And when the NPC reaches sus level 10, they make an immediate beeline for the emergency button. And tests showed this code to be working just as intended. Using ridiculously large view distances, I was able to confirm this behavior to be no problem. So back to the NPC code. In order to make things more interesting, I lowered the view distance and added a roam feature. Nothing new here. Once the roam timer on the CPU farmers reaches 0, new destination coordinates are chosen and the timer resets. Meanwhile, the CPU farmer slowly moves to said destination. And of course, if they see the player and a corpse near each other, they are switched to the panic state where they make a beeline for the emergency button. And the results were surprisingly kind of fun. Now, I would have continued tweaking the NPCs here, but full disclosure, this video wasn't even meant to be released. Originally, this session was simply a test recording to make sure that GameMaker 2.3 functioned properly with my recording software, and so at the time this was just a throwaway project. However, by the end of the session, I realized that the idea actually had some potential, and though extremely basic, I was really digging the whole stealth assassination thing. So indeed, we will be continuing this one in the future, hopefully with a little less lax attitude next time. But for now, that brings us to the end of this episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our start to this weird solo version of Among Us in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.